Thank you, Mr. Hartzer and Mr. King, for being with us this afternoon. I'd like to pick up on a couple of issues that the Deputy Chair asked about, just so I can get a clearer understanding of your view about a couple of things. You were on the record, as many were, saying that they didn't want to have a Royal Commission, and Mr. Thistlethwaite's read out your quote there about how you would prefer to get on and take action instead of having a report written, and you're saying that you actually now think the Royal Commission's been very valuable. I feel like I'm hearing different things from you, and I'm not trying to trip you up. I'm genuinely interested in how a bank CEO is receiving what is going on here. You're saying that you knew a lot of what has come out of the Royal Commission because the banks provided many of the cases and the detail that have been shared, but also that you are somehow finding this surprising. Could you just share a little bit more about what it is that you knew that's come out of the Royal Commission and what it is that you didn't know?
Yes, if I could go one step previous to that, which hopefully gives some of the context of my statement. When I came back to Australia from the UK after the financial crisis, I had spent several years focusing on conduct risk, dealing with customer complaints, remediation of product issues that were historical in the UK context. So when I came to Westpac, one of the messages that I brought was, we have really got to get onto this stuff. Conduct risk is going to be a growing issue. We need to get proactive. We need to start doing product reviews. We need to be looking at complaints and making these changes. And so we had started down that path. So the part of the quote that you read was me saying, we get it. We get that we need to do better, and we're onto it, was what we were trying to say. And then in terms of the Royal Commission, the point I was trying to make was that the case studies that were put in, those were all things that we submitted to the Royal Commission as give us examples. So we went through what we already knew and said, here are the examples. The final part of what I was saying is clearly, as you look at the different sessions that the Royal Commission has gone through, and Westpac's been involved in some of them and not involved in a number of them, there have clearly been case studies, issues that have come out that we didn't anticipate. And reading the report and looking at the detail, particularly in hindsight, or some of the observations that the Royal Commissioner has made, I clearly see the value in that process now. And obviously it's been a painful one for all of us, but I recognize that it's been of good value.
So are you saying that you feel that you had your arms around the issues within Westpac, but outside of Westpac you feel that the issues weren't well understood?
I think broadly that's yes, but I wouldn't want to overstate that. I think there's no question that the case study process and some of these things have highlighted areas where, with the benefit of hindsight, we should have been more on top of things than we were.
Okay. So I'm assuming that we can agree that you accept that some of your bank's conduct prior to the Royal Commission did not meet community standards?
Yes.
Yes, and people were hurt by that conduct. You accept that also?
Yes, and I regret that very deeply.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to understand in a bit more detail about how you're dealing with the backlog of people that were hurt by that conduct. We talked with CBA this morning about some of the worst instances where people have been hurt by bank misconduct.
Yep.
They're not frivolous concerns, they're deep-seated, life-changing impacts that have altered the course of people's whole world. So could you've talked a little bit about your attitude to customers, and if I can say as politely as I can, you're saying the right things and it sounds good. Could you just share with us though this backlog of people who've been mistreated? Tell me, what are you doing to try to rectify some of that?
So we have a list that we've pulled together of the long outstanding issues, customer concerns. I think from memory there were 400 or 500 of those when we pulled all that together, and this was going back over quite a long period of time.
And just share with us what do you define as a long outstanding issue? What were your criteria there?
I'd have to tell you I'd have to come back with the exact number, but generally something that's been going on for 6 or 12 months or longer. Some of these have been going on for years, and that was I think for me honestly one of the most valuable learnings of the Royal Commission was the realization that, whereas we've been focused on complaints, we've been focused on the mass, we hadn't been focused on the ones at the edge. And that's been a really important learning for us. Mm-hmm. So we went out, we looked at complaints, obviously. We've also looked at the collections department and said, are there outstanding collections issues, and which are those? And we've been pulling these together from wherever we can, and then that group has been meeting regularly and has closed out, well over 100 of those items since we started doing this a couple of months ago. So we're working through those as fast as we can. In wherever possible, we are making a determination in favor of the customer. Will that make sense? I'm sure you'd understand that there are some of these cases where the situation is a little more complex than perhaps, some stories have two sides to them. But we are absolutely approaching this, and hopefully it's evident from the fact that this whole process is incredibly public and incredibly painful. We don't enjoy this. We want this to be done as quickly as possible. It is absolutely in our interest to resolve these matters rapidly, and therefore, wherever it makes sense, we're defaulting in favor of the customer.
Sure. Okay, that's good. It would be, I think, helpful for us to have a little bit more information about how you're working through the backlog and the pace at which you're working through those customers. Yep. I say that not to only to keep your bank accountable, but it's important that all the banks are doing this, and I think transparently doing it. So we'd really appreciate some information on that.
Very happy to provide that.
Just to give you a sense, there's about 450 that are open and 380 have been closed. 450 identified, 380 have been closed, so there's still 70 to go, but they're working on them pretty quickly. And it's 120 days is broadly the rule of thumb for a long outstanding issue.
Yeah, okay, thank you very much. Mr. Hartzer, we talked with the CEO of the Commonwealth Bank about the importance of talking with bank victims, and you've mentioned some of the ways that you are trying to keep in touch with your customers, which I commend you for. Could you tell us, though, how many bank victims you've met, say, in the past 3 months, sat down and met face-to-face?
I haven't had a lot of face-to-face meetings like that in the definition that you're
Could you tell me how many?
Well, I don't know what the definition is. It depends which ones we'd be talking about. But I've interacted with a lot of people through email. I've spoken to people on the phone.
I understand. I'm not trying to trap you, but is it possible that...
If your suggestion is more, as I interpret from your question, that more in-person meetings would be a good thing to do, I'm very happy to take that on board and do that.
No, it's not. It's to try to be fair to all the bank CEOs, and we've pinned down the CEO of the Commonwealth Bank on how many bank victims he's met with, and I'd like you to provide us with a number. Have you met face-to-face with any people that could be described as bank victims over the past 3 months?
I struggle with the definition of victims. I've certainly spoken face-to-face with people who are unhappy and have had complaints with us.
Could you tell me why you can't deal with the definition of victims? I'm talking about people who you've acknowledged that people have been hurt by misconduct within your bank, and I'm asking if you have sat down and met with any of them over the last 3 months. It's not a very difficult question, if I can be polite.
Well, if you want to, the answer would be no if you're thinking about the ones in that long-standing group. But I'm very engaged in the process of understanding where we are with specific cases.
Understand. Thank you. Mr. Hartzer, can I raise with you an incident? So one of the concerns I have that's very deeply felt about the Royal Commission process, which I'm happy is on foot, but unhappy that so few people have had their opportunity to tell their story because the government did not give the Royal Commission the time that it would need to do that. So we've had 10,000 people make submissions and only 27 people have had their stories told. I have a case here that I think would have been nice to hear about in the Royal Commission. I can't run my own Royal Commission, but I can share with you some of the facts of this case, and I'd appreciate the opportunity to work with you on whether there can be a resolution for this person. The woman's name is Nicola Dykes-Johnson. I'm not sure if you're aware of
I have become aware
Nicola's
of that case.
Okay, so Nicola is a disability pensioner who, despite being on a very low income, was able to borrow $31,000 by coming into the bank with someone who was later struck off from being a mortgage broker by ASIC. Do you believe that you might have breached the National Consumer Credit Protection Act in lending her that money when she was on a disability pension?
I am familiar with the details of this case. I would rather not speak about that specific case, although in a public forum. However, I would be very happy if you'd like to go into private session to share the situation around that case.
Okay, thank you. I would appreciate the opportunity to do that. I think for the interest of this forum, although I accept, of course, the bank has had interactions with this woman that I wouldn't be aware of, but as I understand it, there was a hardship agreement made with her, which was then removed a little bit later down the track, and then her debt was sold to a debt collector, and she's been pursued, I think, for 4.5 years by the bank or the debt collector for this loan, which I think under community standards probably shouldn't really have been given. So it will be good to talk about this.
Can I just say, I think there's more to this
Okay.
story, and I'd rather not deal with it in a public
Sure.
forum.
That's absolutely fine. Thank you. This is a case where we've got I would describe a vulnerable consumer here. We heard one also in the Royal Commission that related to your bank and a vulnerable consumer. Can you tell us about any changes that you've made towards dealing with populations that might have some additional risk factors when they're borrowing from a big bank?
So this has been a really important topic that we've been talking about under Carolyn McCann's team. What we've been trying to do is to document more specifically the cases where someone would be identified as vulnerable and doing analysis on our portfolio to be a little more proactive in identifying where there might be a risk factor, even if it hasn't necessarily shown itself. As you'd understand, frankly, that raises some interesting questions around privacy and how you deal with people. But it's something that we're very live to, and we think that part of us addressing the underlying frustration and anger that people have about what's happened with banks over the last little while is for us to really nail this issue.
Yeah.
And so it is one of the highest priority topics for us to get right.
So have you made changes to how you manage these customers
Yes,
and
we
their
have.
requests? Okay,
We've
thank
changed policies, we've reiterated practices with collections, we've provided more training to our frontline staff. We have a big program around complaints handling that's going out to staff now. So yeah, it's a big focus for us.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Hartzer, can I clarify, is Westpac still providing flex commissions?
Yes, but we expect that to end very shortly. I
Yeah.
think from the 1st of January, I believe. Is that right?
Yep.
It ends.
I think that you're going to run into an ASIC ban if you don't fix it before then. As I understand it, ASIC's banning the product
Yeah,
in
and
November.
can I just say on flex commissions, we approached ASIC proactively before that came up to say that we thought this was a concerning practice in the industry that should stop.
Well, I'm glad to hear that. So for those of you that haven't been watching this very closely, flex commissions are where the car dealer can essentially sell a different interest rate to a borrower and they get to set the interest rate, essentially. Is that an accurate description of the product?
Within a framework, yes.
Yeah, and I think there's plenty of evidence that that's leading to people who are quite vulnerable ending up paying higher interest rates because the car dealer deems them that they'll pay it.
Yeah, it's
Is
not
that
a good
correct?
practice and it should stop.
Yeah, okay. So why are you still providing the product?
We've got some ongoing contractual arrangements that we're working through, but it's been absolutely our intent to push the industry to getting rid of this.
But I think, aren't you the only bank still providing the product?
No, my understanding is Macquarie Bank does it as well.
Right. But ANZ has managed to stop the practice, I
ANZ
understand.
got out of the car lending business.
Oh, right, okay. So I guess, you know, it's a good example for us. I'm sure there's a lot of complexities to shutting down a product line that you're not happy with, but it's one thing to say that you're taking these things seriously when you're still selling the product. It's harder for us to believe that. So
I do understand.
Yeah.
And all I can say is we're committed to getting rid of it. And again, we were the ones who raised it with ASIC to said, you know, this is the issue is we're one of the only banks that's actually in car lending. A lot of the auto financiers are non-banks. And so our ability to influence what was a practice that went beyond banking was somewhat limited, and that's been one of the complexities of this one.
okay, I'll leave it there, Chair. I've got a meeting at 3.
Authorised by Clare O'Neill, ALP, Canberra.